Despite my unremarkable appearance and string of misfortunes, my life can be summed up in a few words. Betrayed by a colleague that led to a demotion, and abandoned by my newlywed wife, I now find myself in a disheartening situation. To make matters worse, my attractive new boss at this lower level position seems to revel in mocking my plight. I stood there, stunned and bewildered, as her unexpected words left me more confused than ever. I'm Jason, a 28-year-old event planner. I had just gotten married, and I thought my life was finally on track. But then, an unexpected twist turned everything upside down. Who ordered the champagne for tomorrow's event? We're short, aren't we? My boss's sharp voice cut through the office. This event I was overseeing involved serving champagne and wine at a city park. As the person in charge, it was my responsibility to ensure everything was in order. Let me check the order form, I said, rushing towards her. Her frown deepened as she looked at me. It's clear that looks play a significant role in how we're perceived, and unfortunately, I'm often misunderstood. With my stern demeanor and above-average stature, I tend to come across as intimidating. My boss, in particular, seemed almost ready to retreat as I approached her with a mix of urgency and desperation. My signature was on the order form, but I hadn't reviewed it beforehand. I was initially left out of the champagne order, and now I was at a loss for words. One of my senior colleagues, with a smirk plastered on his face, taunted me, "Looks like you really messed up this time. What's your plan?" His grin was infuriating, and the situation became clearer as I realized the senior colleague responsible for the order was well-liked and had a good relationship with our boss. The whispered conversation between them didn't bode well for me. My boss had always viewed me unfavorably, and now it was evident that I was being set up. I checked with Robert, my boss, who confirmed with a scowl, "Jason, it was your mistake after all." His face reddened with anger as he grabbed my collar. This was to be expected. It was the biggest event of the season. "It's not my fault," I protested, but no one was interested in my explanation. I was removed from the wine team, and Robert's smirk only added to my frustration. I thought, if he has time to laugh, he should be doing something to help. With the big day upon us, I reached out to every wholesale alcohol provider I could think of. No matter what, I would likely be held responsible, so I needed to make the most of the little time I had. Miraculously, the event's champagne arrived early in the morning. A supplier I had built a good rapport with reached out to additional liquor companies beyond our local area to assist. Exhausted, I mumbled to myself and dozed off at my desk. As my coworkers began to arrive, they were astonished to see the champagne had been delivered. In my drowsy state, I overheard Robert's voice, boasting, "Handling this is a breeze. I can fix my junior's mistakes in no time." He bragged as if he had solved everything single-handedly, seemingly unaware that I was still at my desk. My colleagues admired him, and his charming demeanor, eloquence, and pleasant attitude clearly played a role in his success. "Are you napping while Robert's working hard?" I was jolted awake by a rough hand gripping the back of my neck. My boss's face was contorted in anger as he yanked me up and dragged me to the director's office. I was fuming, casting a glance at Robert's self-satisfied expression as I was led away. Inside the director's office, the verdict was clear. I was being reassigned to a remote branch. In other words, a demotion. Just 6 months into my marriage, this was a significant blow. I've only been married for 6 months, and my wife is also working. A sudden transfer would be very difficult for us, I said, my voice tinged with desperation. "Do I look like I care about your personal issues?" my boss retorted sharply. "Consider the damage you were about to cause the company at your new location. You'd better fix your attitude too." He made it clear that my reassignment was a demotion. I was to be transferred to a small branch in a seaside town, a step down from my current position, and my salary would likely decrease as well. After leaving the director's office, I texted my wife. I couldn't bring myself to tell her in person. Her response took a while to come, and a week later, I found myself in the seaside town where I was to be stationed. The salty air was a stark contrast to my former life. As it turned out, my wife had decided to leave me just 6 months into our marriage. She had made it clear that she couldn't quit her job and had married me primarily for my financial stability. With that stability gone, she saw no reason to stay. I later learned that she had been seeing someone else even before our marriage. My demotion was just a convenient excuse for her to move on. You never know what life will throw at you, and now, starting from scratch at this new workplace, I was faced with a fresh set of challenges. On my first day, Everyone seemed to regard me with a mix of fear and uncertainty. The towering figure with a stern gaze I once was had vanished, and while I understood their reaction, it still stung. Though I may look intimidating, I'm far from confrontational. I'm not one for physical confrontations, and I detest conflict. Unfortunately, this demeanor makes me come across as cold, and people tend to keep their distance. This has been true since my student days and has carried over into my professional life. Those who take the time to get to know me eventually trust me, but few make it that far. Among the new faces, the office clerk, a young girl, seemed perpetually frightened of me, and my other colleagues treated me as though I were a fragile and touchy subject. However, there was one exception: the branch manager, Miss Lisa Richardson. She was an astonishingly beautiful woman who left me in awe. I found myself staring at her in amazement. She wore her long hair loosely tied up, and her red lipstick was a signature of hers. Her beauty was both pure and commanding, accentuated by two beauty spots beneath her left eye. When she smiled, her eyes narrowed in a way that was irresistibly charming. Beyond her striking appearance, she excelled at her job and treated me with a kindness that stood out amidst the otherwise chilly reception from others. I'm not being conceited. Lisa was genuinely exceptionally kind to me. Whenever I was eating alone, she would always invite me to join her lunch group. If I was quiet, she'd make an effort to bring up various topics, helping to bridge the gap between me and the other colleagues. Thanks to her support, I adapted quickly to the workplace, finding it more comfortable than the main office ever was. People are not always what they seem, she would say to her coworkers and community members while introducing me. In this environment, it's crucial to build relationships with the locals. Our company seemed to handle almost every type of event, from the smallest gatherings to the largest functions. The office clerk mentioned that every group we worked with soon became a regular client. Recently, I had even received fresh fish from a local woman and homemade dishes for dinner. In exchange, I often found myself doing various tasks like cleaning high places or changing light bulbs. As we approached the summer dance festival, "We're counting on you to take the lead, Jason," Lisa said once I had really become a part of the local community. The festival involved collaboration with local elementary schools and community associations, meaning I'd likely be interacting with even more people. I wondered if I was ready for such a significant role. I was anxious about making a poor impression on those I'd be meeting for the first time and didn't want to put my colleagues, who had been so supportive, in a difficult position. My colleagues were incredibly supportive when I struggled to respond immediately. "It's okay, we've got your back," they reassured me. Their kindness was unlike anything I had ever experienced, and I nearly choked up with gratitude. It's all thanks to Lisa, I thought to myself. Whenever I glanced at her, she seemed to be perched gracefully on her desk, legs crossed, her high heels swaying as she smiled. Despite her usually composed and polished appearance, there were moments when her true character emerged. Sometimes unexpectedly rough or unrefined, she often wore high stilettos, even though lower heels would make her work easier. "But these heels look cooler, don't they?" she replied with a smile when I asked why she preferred them. Her answer felt oddly familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I'd heard it before. As the dance festival approached, the office grew increasingly busy. One day, a local police officer from the nearby substation came by for a conversation with Lisa. From what I overheard, there had been recent concerns about some suspicious individuals in the area. Apparently, a renowned scholar had been approached by a man with a menacing appearance who tried to lure the child into his car. When I heard the term menacing appearance, I couldn't help but worry. Lately, I had been helping local elementary school kids with their parade floats, and some parents had started referring to me as the unsavory-looking man. Just as I sighed in frustration, a man burst into the office with such force that the front door barely closed behind him. He was the president of the Elementary School Parent-Teacher Association, and as soon as he spotted me, he stormed over. "You're preying on children under the guise of preparing for the dance festival. You're despicable," he shouted, grabbing me by the collar. Apparently, his daughter had injured her knee the day before, and he seemed to be blaming me, hurling accusations of being perverted, ill-natured, and unfriendly. I had no words. In situations like this, arguing is pointless, so I chose to remain silent. "Officer, arrest this man immediately." The president twisted my arm and tried to push me towards the officer with such force that I couldn't help but cry out in pain. "Ouch!" In a flash, Lisa intervened. She forcefully pushed the president's hand away and stepped in front of me, her glare fierce. Despite the height difference, she tried to shield me behind her, though I was still partly visible. "What do you think you're doing to my subordinate?" Lisa demanded. "Stop making baseless accusations without any evidence." Her conviction and authority seemed to intimidate the president. He continued to rant despite the fact that I had been at the float-making site with a group of children, surrounded by Lisa and other colleagues. Lisa's frustration grew as the president, with his menacing demeanor, persisted in his tirade. "Judging people by their appearance is not only unjust but also problematic," she declared, her voice steady and resolute. Just then, from the entrance of the municipal office, we heard the children's voices ringing out, "That's right, it's not right." It seemed they had come to find me, worried about my absence during float making. They earnestly explained my innocence to the president and began to cry, pleading with him not to bully me. Even the president seemed taken aback, scratching his head in confusion. "I'm sorry, I lost my cool," he said, bowing deeply in apology. I gave the children a reassuring smile, telling them, "It's okay." They stopped crying, their relief evident as smiles spread across their faces. We reconciled, and they appeared happy. That evening, the real culprit was swiftly apprehended, a young man from the neighboring town who bore a striking resemblance to me. Later, as Lisa and I worked overtime and found ourselves alone, I asked her, "Why did you stand up for me? I could have been the criminal, you know." I appreciated her belief in me, but I was also curious about how much she really understood. Lisa's gaze shifted, and she smiled gently. With her heels clicking on the floor, she approached and stood next to my desk. "Did you really forget about me?" she whispered, leaning in and making my heart race. She lifted my chin with her fingers and looked deeply into my eyes. "It was my first time. Will you remember if I do this?" Her hands slowly reached toward my face, and before I could react, she pinched my cheeks with surprising strength. "What? What are you doing?" I stammered, my voice muffled by her firm grip. Lisa laughed softly. "Come on, remember it," she said, extending her hand to reveal a large silver ring that had been absent before. The moment I saw the ring, my memory kicked into overdrive. "This ring? What? This ring? It's the one I gave you, right?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief. Lisa's grin widened as she watched my reaction. The ring was a gift I had given long ago, back when I was in middle school. I had often visited a bookstore where a young woman worked. She wasn't just any girl, she was beautiful, and I was drawn to her every time I went in. The bookstore had always been a refuge for me, especially since I faced similar isolation at school. I noticed that the woman was often avoided by her coworkers, and it seemed to be rooted in jealousy. She had short black hair, multiple piercings, and her nails were always painted black. Her distinctive style was apparently the reason behind the cold shoulder from others. One day, just before closing time, I rushed into the bookstore, eager to grab a book. In the dimming light, I saw her crouched in a corner, searching for something. Are you looking for something?" I gathered my courage to speak. She looked up, startled, and her eyes welled up with tears. The sight of her tearful expression still lingers in my memory, making my heart race. I noticed her silver ring was missing from her finger. A ring she had mentioned was a gift from her brother. There was no one else in the store, and that moment of vulnerability seemed to connect us in a way I hadn't anticipated. Silently, I crouched down beside her and helped search for the lost ring. Despite our efforts, we couldn't find it. She bowed her head in thanks, and while I felt a pang of frustration at not being able to help, I was content to have shared that moment with her. The next day, when I returned to the bookstore, she wasn't there. The usual crowd of employees was gossiping, and I was taken aback when I overheard their leader boastfully recounting how she had thrown the girl's ring into the river. Apparently, the leader's boyfriend had fallen for the girl, and her spiteful act was fueled by jealousy. Feeling a deep sense of sympathy for the girl, I used all my savings to buy a new ring. Later, when she was at the cash register, I slipped it onto her finger. In my nervousness, I accidentally placed it on her left ring finger. Her look of surprise and Lisa's current smile seemed to merge in my memory. "You were the first to put a ring on my left ring finger," I said. Lisa's smile widened. "Jason and Lisa," she replied. She had noticed me during the company induction, and though she had wanted to speak to me, the years had passed. When she heard I was transferring to her branch, she was thrilled and even did a little dance in excitement. "No way," I said, feeling a mix of embarrassment and awe. It was clear to me now that Lisa understood the pain of being judged by appearances and had been empathetic towards me all along. So, was this ring meaningful or just a coincidence? I asked. Lisa explained that even though I was too embarrassed to return to the bookstore, she had been waiting for me. I was touched when you earnestly searched for that ring for her. It showed me who you really were. Even though I didn't recognize the same person from your student days, talking to you now makes me see that you haven't changed at all. Of course it's meaningful, Lisa said with a satisfied grin. I guess I won't win against her, I said shyly, but I feel like we can be together forever because we share the same kind of pain. Next time, I'll propose with a proper ring. Lisa laughed. I'm looking forward to it. What did you think of that? I asked. Subscribing to the channel would be a great motivation for me to create more content. See you in the next video.